This is the problem here. I'm not going to accuse the New York Times of having bias. I mean, they do. Everybody has bias, but there is the author is getting money from donors, big donors, billions. Texas who support Ted Cruz. That is a problem. That is a problem.
You're going back to the author?
But that's a fact.
Okay,
Peter Schweizer is the president.
That has nothing to do with the New York Times. The New York Times, Newsweek, other publications are following these leads. You can try to trace it back to an author, but you're actually going to have to condemn the New York Times, Joe Becker, and Mike McIntyre, because they're the ones that wrote this story.
I use the New York Times as an example in journalism classes because by the 5th paragraph in any political story, we could probably find one right here, whatever the political story in the front page is. By the 5th paragraph, they're substituting their judgment.
Howard, I've just got to say,
that is a fact.
Howard, I consider you a good friend of mine. I think it is unbecoming for you to come on this show and to just reflexively attack everybody that tries to bring up any information that goes against what you want people to hear about Hillary Clinton. They did it to George W. Bush. That's what they do. Jeremy Peters?
Well, I mean, Howard, would you say that I'm a sloppy political New York Times journalist? I think that is an overly broad generalization that maligns my colleagues, and I really think it's quite unfair of you because I've dealt with you an awful lot, and I don't think that you would call me sloppy.
I would not, but there are plenty of people who write for the New York Times and every other paper that I think are incredibly sloppy, and I could name a lot of them, including some correspondents, well-known correspondents on various networks, one of which covered this story, who basically put up stuff. I have been threatened by reporters that they were going to run a story that they knew wasn't true and I knew wasn't true unless I produced evidence to prove that it wasn't true. That's what you learn when you run for president.
We're only talking about one thing here, and this is what when James Carville came on, he kept going, hey, look at the moon, look at the moon, look at that over there, look at the cow over there. I mean, it's always look at something else.
Yes.
Don't look. So let me just ask you, do you have any bad dealings with Joe Becker or Mike McIntyre?
I do not.
Okay, just curious. Because that's what we're talking about this morning.
Bill Clinton should take $500,000 for a speech in Moscow while all these other dealings are going on, and Hillary Clinton is.
I don't know what the circumstances.
Okay, but just do you think yes or no? Do you think that's a legitimate question?
I have no idea. You have to know what the circumstances are.
Okay, come on.
All right, Jonathan Capehart.
That's all I need to hear.
You're sitting there alone because your newspaper has not been maligned yet.
Oh, it will be.
We're getting there.
It will be.
But it will be if they dare to even. I got to say, we are seeing this in real time. How the Clintons, they wonder why they get bad press. And it's because they bring it on themselves. If you ever question them on very legitimate, complex, which I'm the first to admit, it's going to take me a while to sit down and read this article and sift through it and draw the lines because it's very complicated. Which means maybe it won't stick with voters, but they're going to go out, they're going to malign reporters, they're going to malign newspapers. That's what they do.
Sure, Joe. Well, one, I know one of the two reporters on this story, and Joe Becker is a solid reporter. Seeing her name in the byline made me pay extra attention to it because she's such a solid reporter. But it shouldn't surprise anyone that the Clinton team and Clinton supporters would reflexively go out and defend them. They've been doing it for 20-something years. And also the other problem that we have here is we're talking about a book that has yet to be released. It doesn't come out until May 5th. And so there's a bit of a fact or information void that's here, and that allows all of us to talk about all of these things without knowing exactly what's there. And then the other problem here is, in the absence of facts, in the absence of information, we also have nothing but denials and reflexive pushback from the Clinton camp. And so maybe a month from now or 2 months from now, candidate Clinton will step forward and talk about in detail all of these stories and all of the dealings. But until then, we're going to have a lot of this
Joe, can I make a
cotton
point here?
candy arguments.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in? One of the things, I actually have read the New York Times story. I got up this morning and read it, and one of the things that's disclosed in the story is that the Clintons got millions of dollars in donations that weren't disclosed as they had agreed with the Obama administration they would do. So there are serious charges. There's real reporting here. I think the other thing to remember, too, is we've been talking about this campaign, this sort of character assassination of Peter Schweizer. I do think it's worth remembering the guy has written a very well-regarded book about the Bushes. He wrote a book about insider trading in Congress that led to the Bipartisan Stock Act of 2012. He tends to kind of get smeared, but I think it's worth remembering this is a serious guy who's done serious work that's led to a serious article. And to Jonathan's point, the one thing we really haven't seen is anybody from the Clinton world come out and rebut the charges and say, here's why they're wrong, here's why we took this money, here's why we didn't
really
disclose it.
Yeah.
That's the next step in this story.
But Josh, you've talked to him, you've interviewed him, you've looked into this. Is he a man with an agenda? Is he bankrolled by people who support Ted Cruz?
I don't think there's any question that Schweizer's a conservative, and I think people should read the book and make up their minds for themselves. But most of what is in there, and most of what's in the Times story is, out there in the public record. People knew about some of these characters in the book. Various newspapers have done individual reporting. As I understand it, what the book really does is kind of collect all this stuff and put it together. But I don't accurate to portray Schweizer as simply a Republican with a grievance against Democrats, or he wouldn't be out doing this big investigation of Jeb Bush. And it's also worth pointing out, since we're talking about the Times involvement and other newspapers, Schweizer told me he is going to go out and do the same thing as he did with the Clinton book, try and partner with interested news organizations that want to further these stories that he's investigating.
So here's my question. I don't think this is an unfair question. So you just whacked Bill Clinton for going to take $500,000 from Moscow, and the reason
we asked whether that was a legitimate question to ask.
Okay, so it certainly isn't a legitimate question to ask. So you asked that question. Then why is it not legitimate to question the fact that the author of this book got a whole bunch of money from Ted Cruz's people? Why is that not legitimate?
You can do that, but the question is it a fact that he received that money, and is that okay? And I will just say, my brother serves as an ambassador. His wife is a blogger, a writer, and she has a career. She has to check everything she does with the State Department, and she does so willingly, supportingly of him. And she has to put her career in check, literally, in support of her spouse. I think these are more than legitimate questions. This could be a problem.
I think it's a legitimate question, Mika. I'm not saying it's...
Forget the author at this point. Let's make sure that if the facts are true, we need to pursue that.
I would say
you can go on your little jihad against the author, but it's not going to change the facts.
I'm raising the same issues about the author that he's raising about Bill Clinton.
Here's the thing, though. If it's a sort of one of these Clinton tell-alls where a guy goes, I talked to the Secret Service agent. They told me that the Clintons would sacrifice cats on the 3rd lunar eclipse of the 4th month of the 7th year. Oh, my Lord. That's one thing. But as Josh says, if you take public documents and it's all written down there and you have it all together and then you hand that over to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and they go and they do their investigations, there's not a lot. There's suddenly the person that gives you that information is not really legitimate, as long as it's public records and you have independent parties piecing it all together. But we'll keep talking about it.
The Foundation has done amazing things for the world, let it be said.
They've also done amazing things for the Clintons, let that be said as well. And they've gotten extraordinarily rich. Let that be said of the Clintons also. And it's the intertwining of all these relationships that causes this horrible concern and problem. And we will see if the same is for Jeb Bush. I think that's one of the problems when you have these families, these American monarchies that pass power down from one person to another person to another person, and there's all this self-dealing on the side. That's a real problem.